to GW Integrative Medicine, the podcast about disease prevention and health promotion from the Office of Integrative Medicine and Health at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences.
I'm Dr. Lee Frame, Program Director of the Integrative Medicine Program here at GW.
And I'm Janet Rodriguez, the office's Administrative Director. Today, we're talking food as medicine with Laura Pohl, Director of Nourishment Programs at Smith Center for Healing in the Arts in Washington, D.C.
An oncology clinical nurse specialist, oncology nurse navigator, and health supportive chef, she has more than 30 years of experience in oncology clinical care and innovative professional education.
Chef Laura provides training and informances across the country in integrative cancer care, culinary translation in cancer care, palliative care, advanced care planning, and the human art of healing.
Laura, what's the first thing you remember about cooking?
Wow. Well, let me preface this by saying I grew up in Southwest Louisiana, where we eat, still do, anything that walks, crawls, flies, swims, or jumps. And I was surrounded by lots of great cooks. And the first thing I remember playing around with was in my dreamy kitchen. So this was just a little play kitchen, and making mud pies and inviting the neighbors over. But then probably the next thing I remember making was cooking with my grandmother, and we loved to make breakfast for dinner. So I remember making biscuits with her. And probably the first thing I ever cooked by myself, nobody around supervising me, was scrambled eggs. And then I really began cooking when I left home to go to college in Tennessee, and I wanted to bring Louisiana with me in some way, so I started cooking for myself and my friends Louisiana-style cooking. So that's the first thing.
Well, that's wonderful. And I have to add that actually scrambled eggs was also the first thing I ever cooked. It's a nice starter dish.
Yeah. Eggs are so basic.
That's right. Fundamental. So when did you transfer from being, your typical average person who cooks to eat to thinking about food as medicine?
Well, as I was thinking about this, I kept going. I would remember something and say, oh, no, but then there was this. So I'm talking about an evolution of realizing this. And it probably started in about 1975 when my mother had a heart attack at the age of 45. And so I was 18 or so. And she went on a low cholesterol diet and then eventually went on a very low fat diet, not quite as low as, say, the Ornish diet. So I think I began to get the idea then that maybe food could help. And she was told she couldn't have surgery. She was not a candidate for it. So it was going to be meds and lifestyle. So she was an example to me of that. Then probably the next thing was when I had temporomandibular joint pain, and I was working with not an orthodontist, but a dentist who sent me to a chiropractor who was very skilled, and he told me to eliminate certain foods from my diet, and lo and behold, that really helped with the pain. And then my husband at the time, in the early 90s, was starting to get some problems with blood pressure, and a doctor told him to follow the McDougall diet, which is a vegan diet, which was so far away from how I ate and how he ate. But we did it, and his plan and his way of doing it was very instructive to me. And that's when I started learning how to cook, especially plant-based foods. So that was in the 90s. And then as an oncology nurse, I would hear doctors and even dietitians sometimes telling people with cancer, it doesn't matter what you eat, just don't lose weight, get the calories in, and really not a lot of thought about the quality of the food. And somehow this didn't seem right to me. It seemed like it did matter. So then I went to the Natural Gourmet Institute to become a health supportive chef and find out what would be important about eating for a person with cancer. And that's really what set me on this path as a culinary translator, so to say.
You just mentioned that you went for your training to be a health supportive chef. Can you sort of tell us what that means?
Yeah. So, traditional culinary training at the time did not really focus on necessarily healthy food, and some of it could have been healthy and it was certainly delicious. But this school, the Natural Gourmet Institute for Food and Health, had a chef's training program. And we learned how to take classic recipes and turn them into vegan food if it could be done. If it didn't taste good and it couldn't be done, then it's obviously not something we're going to serve. But and we also learned that what's health supportive for one person may not be health supportive for someone else. And what is health supportive at one time in your life may not be health supportive for you at another time. So the definition of what was health supportive eating grew broader and broader as the school evolved. So by the time I went there, we were also working not only with vegan foods, but with chicken and eggs and fish. And now that definition grows even broader. So the main thing I learned is, as a health supportive chef, it's what would be health supportive for the person you're working with, because you really can't eat dogma. And
I love that.
Yeah, so you have to individualize it and figure out what's health supportive for the person. So basically, we learn how to cook every kind of food, for the most part, in the most health supportive way that we could.
That's really wonderful, Laura. I think that hits on a lot of things we try to talk about in integrative medicine with the personalized care, is that there's no one right diet, right? There's the right diet for you. And it might be harder for us to have that conversation with our patients because you got to do a little extra work, and then they're going to have to try it out. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's worth every minute you're spending on it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you had one piece of advice to give a healthcare practitioner about how to work through that personalized nutrition issue, what would it be?
Oh, one piece of advice.
Or, a snippet.
Yeah. I think one thing is to be open-minded. And again, think of it, people can't eat dogma. And also to think about that there are no good or bad foods. Food just gives information. So, and helping people, your patients or clients, relax around that, because people come in thinking, they don't want to tell you what they eat. They think it's bad, and people get so judgmental for themselves, or they think we're going to judge them. I was scared to death to go to this culinary school because it's like, what if I eat something that's not vegan? Will they come after me? That sort of thing. So really be open-minded and non-judgmental as you work with people. And we certainly don't have all the answers in it, but there are some basic principles that you can use as a guide, and within those, there's a lot of leeway. And really emphasize to people, we want to land in on what's going to work for you, and be partners in this. So I would say removing the judgment, being open-minded, and partnering with people is going to be a big thing. And the other thing is not, glorifying diet as magic and the answer, and not, over-promising what diet can do. So knowing where the research is, and this is one part of your health, one part of your plan, but you're a whole person. And so we have to integrate this around other aspects of your life, so what about moving? What about your stress? Those sorts of things.
Absolutely. You have to treat the whole person and their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So we love that your title is Director of Nourishment. Why did you choose nourishment instead of nutrition?
Well, because nutrition is getting down to the science and the sorted out pieces. of diet and food. So it's about nutrients like proteins, calories, and fats. And I dislike the trend of it's even happening in restaurants. Choose your protein, choose your this. So I don't eat proteins, I eat food. And it's so much more than nutrients. It's the whole. You are nourished through the sight of the food, the smell of it cooking, the people you are enjoying it with. So there are so many more parts to nourishment. The digestion piece. You might eat the healthiest food in the world, but it won't necessarily nourish you if you are eating on the run, stressed out, having an argument while you eat. So nourishment is the whole piece around the goodness of what you get from food. And it reminds me I was teaching a class and talking about 8 principles, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And there was a woman from France in the class, and all the people in the class had cancer. And the last principle that I hadn't gotten to was delicious. And she was like, you talk about all this science and all this stuff, but food is just enjoyable. It's pleasurable in France, so and so and so. So it includes all of that. And it's not just about the science of the various nutrients that you put in your body. And people often call me mistakenly a nutritionist or a dietitian. And I tell them, though I understand nutrition, I had lots of nutrition science in nursing school. I am not a nutritionist. I am a culinary translator. And what I do is help you take the diet that's been prescribed to you or that you've read about and you're trying to make sense of, and I help you translate that onto the plate. And I talk about all the practical steps that go in between that prescription and getting it on the plate and into you.
Yeah, I think that's something we can all actually identify with, because we've all had those moments, a holiday, a meal that you have the same meal every year, and it's about the feeling of it almost more than the food itself.
Absolutely. I mean, how much of that time is spent chewing and swallowing, and how much of that time was the preparation and the family arriving and all that. So the eating part is just one little bit of that whole thing. That food has become the centerpiece. It's gathered you here, but it's more than just that.
What do you find is the biggest barrier or obstacle that you see when working with patients in terms of getting them to a healthier way of looking at food and healthier lifestyle?
I think the thing I hear the most is I don't have time. I don't know what you all hear, what your experience is. And
Yes.
That's probably become more and more the issue. And, back in the old days, somebody was probably cooking for you at home. So many of us don't know how to cook anymore. And so we don't know what goes into it, or we have as much time as we want to make for it. So I do spend a lot of time helping people parse that out, and then if it really is the issue, and preparing food cannot be their priority, then let's look at ways you can get health supportive food that nourishes you, that you enjoy, and we save some time in some way or the other. So it has to be practical. Sometimes people also think they can't afford it, but that's not usually the number one. So I just listen to people and let them explain to me, why it is they think they don't have time, and let's see how we can work around that. And one of the things I do is just use myself as an example. When I was talking about learning the McDougall diet, for instance, I was working full time at the hospital. I had a sideline music business that I was working on the weekends. I was on 3 boards. meetings at night, rehearsals. And yet I still was going to be the primary, preparer of this food for my family. And I talk about what I did to make that happen in a way that it didn't stress me out, that we can enjoy it, and it became part of our lives.
What are 8 basic food principles, and how can they be used for health and wellness?
Yeah, so these are some principles I learned in culinary school. And what I tell people when I go to the refrigerator or the pantry and think about what I'm going to eat, or if I go out to a restaurant or shop in the grocery store, or if I'm thinking of the menu I'm going to prepare for you on this retreat, these are some of the principles I use in preparing. So they're not the only principles, but these are ones I like to use. And again, I first start off reminding myself that you can't eat dogma. There are no good or bad foods. Foods mostly gives information. And then I think about Michael Pollan, who says, eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. So these are sort of some general guiding principles. And then the principles are eating whole foods. So whole is one. And that means eating all the edible parts of the food as nature provides it. So that would mean, for instance, eating an apple and the skin, and I would get an organic one if I'm going to eat the whole apple, as opposed to apple juice. Eating whole grains instead of lots of refined grains. So that's, and I also say if you enjoy eating chicken, for instance, cook the chicken with the bone in it. It's going to taste better. It's going to be moister. You're going to cook in some of the minerals in the bone into the meat. Then you can turn those bones into stock if you're so inclined. So eating all the edible parts of the food as nature provides it. A second principle is fresh. And that's less important than it used to be, because when used to canned vegetables and fruits had less nutrient value, but now according to the dietitians, they're doing a much better job with canning, and so the nutrient value is not that low as it used to.
And I think frozen vegetables are more available now as well.
Yeah, exactly, and those are usually flash frozen right after they're picked. So I don't want to say you always have to eat fresh, but from a culinary standpoint, fresh vegetables and fruits taste different. And depending on how you're using them, that might be an important factor. So I wouldn't want to take frozen green beans, thaw them out and throw them in a salad, for instance. But if I cook them or put them in a soup frozen, then that would be okay. So fresh is kind of a taste thing and, context thing with whatever you're preparing. And then another principle is natural. So eating food as close to the natural state as it was when it came out of the ground or off the bush. For instance, eating a potato with the skin on it that you baked or boiled as opposed to potato chips. Eating an orange instead of orange Jell-O. Now I know that's extreme, but
a good example.
It also means eating foods, when we talk about natural, with as few pesticides and harmful chemicals as possible. So that might, and then people start asking me about organic. Does that mean I need to eat everything organic? And you probably know about the environmental working groups, the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. And as a gardener, I know that not everything I grow is going to need some sort of help in terms of pests. Mm-hmm. The Dirty Dozen lists those foods, those fresh produce for that year that is most likely to have been sprayed with pesticides. So that's also what we mean by natural, is trying to have food that has as little added harmful chemicals as possible.
Well, and I'm glad you pointed out, too, that it's for that year. I think a lot of people don't realize that, actually. They think this is just a set in stone dirty dozen, and it's out every year, and you have to kind of pay attention for that year. Also, something that I do is I try to pay attention to like the ones that are typically on the dirty dozen or typically on the clean 15, because then you're pretty good at getting those in one or the other.
Right. So, apples, as long as I can remember, have always been on the dirty dozen.
Right. I always buy those organic.
Right. And so, it's a lot. You're going to save yourself some money and be able to prioritize. If you look at your shopping list and it's on the dirty dozen and you can't find it organic, then maybe you're going to wait and get it next week or get it somewhere else. And I will never pay organic prices for asparagus because they're never sprayed.
Yeah, you don't spray asparagus.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So another principle after natural would be local, and that's a big thing. You hear about locavores and that sort of thing. But eating food that's grown locally has several advantages. One is it didn't have to travel and add to the carbon footprint to get here. It's likely to be fresher. It's likely that they didn't have to put preservatives on it. And if you buy from in the farmer market and can talk to the farmers or the people at the stand, they could tell you what kind of growing practices they use. And they might say, well, we aren't certified organic because we can't afford to be certified, but we can tell you that this is low spray or no spray or whatever. So eating foods local, and if you eat locally grown foods, in most cases, they're also going to be seasonal. So that's another principle. So eating food that's in season where you are, because every food is in season somewhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say I'm not going to occasionally enjoy a mango in the middle of and there'll never be a local mango in Roanoke, Virginia. So it's not like I stick to these religiously, but if you think about it, in the winter, the foods that either grow in the winter or are storable to feed you throughout the winter are your root vegetables like potatoes and turnips and rutabagas and your winter squashes and some of your greens. And of course, citrus fruits are in season in the colder months. And it's kind of interesting to me that something high in vitamin C is so available during cold and flu season. But anyway, eating those types of food, it was meant to nourish us at a time of year where it's cold. And we want to stay warm, and we want food that's going to stick to our ribs. And I've worked with a lot of people with cancer who were on raw foods diets, which pretty much means that you're eating foods that typically grow in the summer. And, and they were like, oh my gosh, I'm freezing all the time and blah, 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 in the winter. And I'm like, well, that's because none of these foods are in season, and maybe we need to look at maybe taking a break from the raw foods as long as you're going to be up here, where the temperatures are so cold. Now, if you want to spend the winter in Florida, that would be a different situation. So foods that are in season cue us about that. And interestingly, one of the reasons they think we can eat so much food in the summer, foods that we used to not eat, is because we're in air conditioning and we don't have that cue of this food is really making me hot and, full. And, if you were eating it out in the hot weather, you wouldn't even eat that much food or that kind of food.
That's true. So, when you get hot and sweaty, you don't want to eat a bunch of food.
Right. So we're kind of losing our cues, And then after seasonal, another one, I love this, in harmony with tradition. And there's a couple of parts to that. One is that if you are going to eat more plant-based diet, one of the ways you're going to get your protein is from grains and beans. Um, and and some people just don't know where to start with that. Probably the main grain they've ever eaten is wheat. And maybe the beans they've had was in refried beans at the Mexican restaurant. So what are the beans and grains that my ancestors ate in the old country? And this makes for a fabulous conversation with your parents, your grandparents, or anybody you can find who remembers the old way. So chances are those beans and grains might taste good to you. It could be even you have a genetic ability to digest those better than you would some other beans. I think of soy for myself. I cannot digest soy well at all. And I haven't done my gene testing, but I may have some Asian genetics in me, but I'm probably just not geared up genetically to digest those. So you mentioned, Jeanette, you had black-eyed peas at lunch. And so those beans are indigenous to certain parts of Africa and the U.S. So think about the beans and grains of your ancestors. And also in harmony with tradition is bringing in the cultural part of and maybe even the religious parts of your food traditions and remembering those. And then another is balance. So you want foods that are balanced for colors, for taste and texture. So if everything was boiled, you'd be so bored with it. And varying it. And some things would be soft and some things would be chewy and some things crunchy, some things fresh, some things cooked. You also want balance for quantity. And one way to look at that is to look at the American Institute for Cancer Research and their new American plate. Or there are other sites that also have My Plate, for instance. But it shows you about how much of what kind of food should take up the plate, take up the real estate on your plate. So balancing, and also
before you continue, I actually want to interject there. One of my favorite tools is the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I feel like it's like My Plate, but more science-y. And I usually recommend that one for my patients.
Okay. And so I work, mostly with people with cancer. So it may be very similar, but like 2/3 of the plate are from plants and 1/3 would be from the animal kingdom. Or if it's a vegetarian plate, then that other third would be your more concentrated, say, grains and beans for your protein. And when I talk about plants, it's like, okay, I know corn is a plant, but it's really a grain. And, we're talking about a rainbow of vegetables, and a whole 2/3 of your plate is mashed potatoes doesn't count.
No, it does not count, though mashed potatoes are delicious.
Right. So if you're really into the science, so that's called the Harvard Healthy
Eating Plate. Yes, it's similar in structure to My Plate, and actually it's not diet prescriptive. So you can use it with any diet. If you're a vegetarian, if you're a pescatarian, if you're paleo, you could still apply it. It's similar to what you're saying. It's about having the majority of your plate being plants and having your drink of choice being water.
Yes, that's another thing I talk to people about is people drink with their meals. And I think part of that is that people don't chew very well. And so they're using the liquid as a way of getting that bolus of food down because they haven't really chewed it well enough. And I tell people that your stomach is a pot and it's going to finish cooking your food and getting it ready to go into the intestines. And any pot, if it's filled to the rim, is not going to cook the food evenly. So the parts at the bottom of the pot are going to turn to mush, and the parts at the top won't cook at all. And then this gets pushed into your intestines, and no wonder people have problems with gas and bloating and such. And then when a pot is full, it also overflows. And I tell people, so if your stomach's a pot and it's overflowing, where does it go? And then they kind of get these big eyes and they say, oh, yeah, it's going in my esophagus. And I said, how many of you have reflux? And so they're like, oh, yeah. So to think about it in those terms, how much food fills 2/3 of your stomach? Well, I have people put their two hands together with their palms up, sort of like you're going to scoop up water. So you make like a little bowl with your hands. And 2/3 of your stomach is filled by this volume in your hands, not some other person's hands. And I tell people that's either chewed or unchewed food. And I say, I like to eat a lot, and I can. So if I chew really well, I can get more food in my stomach and still have room for digestion. So, and that actually I learned from Ayurveda. So, yeah, it's real practical to think. So if you add a lot of liquid, whether it's water or not, you're going to fill up that pot too much. And I'd rather eat rather than drink and fill my stomach up. And so I also recommend people drink sips of warm or room temperature liquids at meals. And then if you eat food that's moist and such, and soups and things like that, you're going to get some of your liquid in that way, and then get the rest of your hydration in at other times.
That's great. We couldn't agree more with you, especially about the warm liquid. If you're drinking a lot of cold liquid, you're going to knock down your enzymes and you're not going to be able to digest.
And heat. I mean, cooking takes heat and digestion takes heat and all of that. And then the last principle, which is certainly not the least, and it's the one I spend the most time with people on, is delicious. And if it's not delicious, it's not nourishing. So that's something I really work with people on. And people with cancer have particular challenges, particularly when they're on treatment, with the food not tasting like it used to. And so I work a lot with them in flavor building so that the food can be delicious. But, for instance, fish, a lot of people don't know how to cook fish where it tastes good to them. And so, but if you teach them a way to make it delicious, then all of a sudden a food that they really did not like to eat, now they like it because it tastes good. And that's really, I love the delicious part. I can tell you that.
Excellent. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us, Chef Laura.
Sure. My pleasure. Eat well.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. This is the GW Integrative Medicine podcast from the GW Office of Integrative Medicine and Health.
I'm Dr. Lee Frame.
And I'm Janet Rodriguez.
Thanks for listening.